Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and it's the first Monday of the month, which means we're going to be taking a look at the next issue of Spawn, specifically Spawn number 11. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. Before we get into it today, I'd first like to apologize for the strange sound of my voice. As I stated in last week's video, pollen season is upon us, at least where I live, and it's really hitting me like a slap across the face this year. First published in June of 1993, we see here on the cover of Spawn number 11, it looks as though Spawn is in some sort of a war zone fighting a large group of soldiers. However, as we get into the story this week, we will learn that that is not the case at all. Story, Frank Miller. Art, Todd McFarlane. Letters and editor, Tom Orzechowski. Color, Steve Oliff, Ruben Rude, and Ollie Optics. On the first page, we see Spawn's hands pushing upward as if he's trying to fend off some sort of an attacker, and we see that that's not the case at all. In fact, he's trying to be awoken by his friend Bobby, who is one of the homeless men who live in the alleyways with Spawn, as Bobby tells him that he needs to snap out of it, as he's very concerned for the well-being of Spawn, aka Al Simmons, who he considers to be a friend. We see here that Spawn is writhing around on the ground, almost in convulsions, as Bobby isn't sure what to do, but he wants to calm Spawn down so that the police do not show up. And we also see his friend Boots coming up from behind the corner on the other side of the alley. This is the first appearance of Boots, who will become a reoccurring character going forward. Finally, Bobby gives up on trying to reason with Spawn and instead decides to smack him across the face in hopes of trying to get him to snap out of it. This seems to work as Spawn grabs Bobby's hand and then seems to come to and realize that he's in the alleyway with his friends and tells them about the strange dream he had that involved weird gods and aliens and an aardvark who talked. This, of course, is in reference to the happenings that went on in Spawn issue number 10. If you haven't watched my video on issue number 10, I suggest you do so because it provides a decent little bit of backstory to go along with what's happening in this part of the book. Bobby and Boots then seem to believe that Al's been on the sauce as they both talk about the hallucinations that they have when drunk. However, Spawn exclaims that he doesn't drink, but then quickly apologizes for yelling at the two men as he realizes that they're just concerned for his safety. They then continue to try and figure out what's been going on as they basically explain to Spawn that while he's been living with them for a while, they really don't know anything about him. He then tells them that it's not a story that can be told quickly and it doesn't really have any punchline or happy ending, but he basically writes it off in the sense that he compares the alley and the men living in the alley to the boots that Boots wears. Boots only has these pair of cowboy boots as his prized possession, and he takes exquisite care of them to make sure that they're always in tip-top shape, despite the fact that he's homeless and lives in trash. And Al tells him that Bobby and Boots and the other men living in the alley are of that type of importance to him, and he wants to make sure that he's taking care of them and keeping them safe, as the events that unfold around him are oftentimes putting those men in danger. However, their conversation is suddenly interrupted by a loud boom that comes from a nearby alleyway. This startles Bobby and Boots, and Spawn decides to run headlong towards the sound. Bobby tries to stop him, saying that it's surely the cops. However, Spawn informs him that the sound was that of a 50mm Japanese tsunami. It's apparently some sort of fictitious anti-tank cannon handheld ray gun thing that is just one more of the fictitious weapons that exists in the Spawn/Greater Image universe. They peer around the corner of a building and see another large explosion and a woman flying through the air. She then is potentially, I guess, caught by Spawn as he leaps to try and protect her from being smashed up against the wall. She asks for him to save her. Unfortunately for her, another blast comes from behind, blowing a hole straight through Spawn's chest and blasting off half of her torso as well. She dies instantaneously. Bobby, of course, is shocked by this whole thing as we see Spawn's body lying on the ground with a large hole in his chest and a large shadow coming from the figure who is carrying the weapon that fired this blast. We see that the blast came from this individual whose name is Boomer. Bobby yells at him saying that he just killed his friend, but Boomer tells Bobby to shut up and that he'll kill him as well because he's got what he refers to as a case of the nasties tonight, as we see him stepping over Spawn's body, which still has a giant hole blown through its torso. However, Boomer is then surprised when he hears "Me Too" coming from what he believes to be a corpse, as we see Spawn leap to his feet and grab the tsunami out of Boomer's hands, and he tells Boomer that it's his fault that he's in such a bad mood. Bobby is shocked to see this, as he thought that Spawn was certainly dead. Boomer also thought that Spawn was certainly dead, and he can't believe what he's seeing either. We then see Spawn staggering on the ground as he takes a knee, still holding the tsunami in his other hand. Bobby, of course, rattled by the entire situation, yells out that he can't believe that Spawn is even remotely close to alive with a hole in his chest the size of Bobby's fist. And he also can't believe that he's letting Boomer get away, even though he could have taken him out right then and there. Spawn realizes that this could have been done easily, that he was very capable of outmatching Boomer in this situation. However, he's more concerned about what the confrontation between Boomer and this girl was and why he was chasing her. So he decides that he's going to follow Boomer back to wherever he came from to gather more information. But first he has to heal the giant wound in his chest. This, of course, freaks Bobby out even more, as he now really cannot believe that Spawn just had, a fist-sized hole through his chest and now it's gone completely. But he states that he's just going to wait for Spawn to get back and try and deal with this on his own. And on the next page, we see a cool splash image of Spawn jumping through the air as we see the city skyline of New York behind him, as he's still carrying the gun along with him while he hunts down Boomer to try and figure out what exactly is happening in his alleyway. Here on the next page, we see Spawn jumping across the rooftops of the buildings as he has no trouble following Boomer through the streets, tailing him back to a building which he gets on the roof of. Conveniently, the skylight's been left open so that he can overhear the conversation below, as Boomer starts to explain that he killed that creep chick, but he's also very concerned about the other guy that he shot who got right back up after having a hole blown through his chest. However, his leader, who he's referred to as Norton, doesn't seem to believe him and thinks that Boomer is on drugs, and is very upset about this, as the Nerd Gang, which is apparently who Boomer belongs to, has a very strict policy about none of its members being allowed to use or sell drugs. As we see inside the building, Boomer is in the grasp of apparently the Nerd's cyborg super enforcer known as Byron, and Byron is not all that bright. It's not told whether this is a result of all of his cybernetic enhancements or he just wasn't all that bright to begin with, as we see his speech is written with a lot of backwards letters, and he speaks in very broken kind of childlike English. And Norton then tells Byron to bring Boomer over to him so that he can reiterate what it is that the Nerd Gang, who apparently Norton is the leader of, is trying to accomplish. As we see down here, Spawn is still on the building top trying to figure out what's going on, with the mention of these two different street gangs, the Nerds and the Creeps, who seem to be made up of very tech-savvy, middle-class white kids from the suburbs. We see here on the next page that Byron holds Boomer's face right down to Norton's level as Norton continues to lecture Boomer about not using drugs, and that the importance of the alleyway cannot be overstated as it's needed for them to have a direct line into Creep's territory. He continues to berate him. However, Byron seems to get a little bit overenthusiastic as he starts to shock Boomer's head. Norton then says that he wants Boomer to say that he's going to, basically adhere to the nerds' codes and that nerds kill creeps. And unfortunately, he realizes then that Boomer is dead, and Byron apologizes for kind of overstepping his bounds. We then see that Spawn realizes that a turf war is about to go down in his alleyway, but he needs to prevent it to protect all of the homeless guys that live there. So he jumps off the top of the building and heads back to the alley to try and create a plan that will help him defeat the two gangs while not endangering any of his friends. Meanwhile, back in the alley, Bobby and Boots are still trying to figure out what they're going to do with the body of the young woman, as they're afraid of what will happen if she's discovered by the police. However, their conversation is interrupted by the presence of the Creeps and their giant cyborg enforcer known as James, who was apparently very fond of the young woman whose name we find out is Buffy. And he's quite distraught as he's not so much simple-minded the way that Byron is, but he's overly emotional. So it seems as though whatever cybernetics they're using are affecting their intellect and or personality in some way or another, that it's unnatural to who they would normally be. James decides that he wants to leave a message for the nerds, and he wants to leave it in blood, so he's going to kill Bobby and use his blood to write the message. Fortunately for Bobby, he's cut off when he's hit by a giant blast in the back from none other than Spawn, who was returned to the alleyway after spying on the nerds' hideout. James goes down immediately, and the rest of the creeps who are nearby all turn to see what's confronting them, as Spawn exclaims that they need to leave his alley immediately. He continues to fire upon them, knocking the weapons out of all of the other creeps' hands and hitting James once again as he tries to get up. However, this blast doesn't really seem to faze James very much, as his armor is more than capable of protecting him from the blast in this case. And as we can see here on the next page, there is an insert poster by Jeff Darrow. Here we see in the poster that Spawn is teamed up with Big Guy and Rusty the Boy Robot as they fight this giant dude with crazy over-the-top insane weaponry. Normally I have a problem with this kind of stuff where it's like weaponry and armor that just doesn't make sense unless it's done on purpose to be, kind of a tongue-in-cheek joke sort of reference of just absurd over-the-top, crazy bombastic illustration. I think this is a pretty cool poster. Despite it not being in color, it's still really fun. I like the image, and I'm glad that it was included in this book. We then see that the next issue of Spawn will contain a poster insert of Rob Liefeld's Bloodwolf. If you'd like to know more about Bloodwolf, please check out my videos on both Darker Image #1 and Bloodwolf #1. Then James is able to get to his feet as he's angry at Spawn for interfering and shooting him in the back. So he takes aim and pops a bunch of little laser cannons out of his wrists apparently and opens fire. Spawn is caught off guard but is able to dodge the laser fire as he tries to figure out what he can do to try and gain control of the situation. He quickly rolls and tumbles out of it and then makes a split decision to try and divert their attention and make them do what he wishes instead of what they wish, as we see James and the other member of the Creeps that's left become very surprised and shocked at what they see as we hear Spawn yell from off the page, "Creeps," in a loud, foreboding voice. We then see Spawn jump into the air and put on a large, spectacular display of necro energy, showing them images of demons behind him as he exclaims that the battle will be fought here, the war will end here and that the creeps will die, somewhat insinuating that he's a member of the Nerds gang. This spectacular display catches James and his cohort off guard as they decide they're better off retreating and getting the rest of the gang for reinforcements. Spawn later then goes to the hideout of the Nerds and puts on a similar display, exclaiming that the creeps will be in the alleyway to fight the Nerds this evening, and if the Nerds don't show up, that the creeps will hunt them all down individually as they cower in fear. However, Norton decides that they're going to meet the creeps on the turf that they've decided will be the war, or will be the battlefield, and that they're going to fight the war tonight. However, this guy down here seems to believe that what he's seeing is some elaborate hologram, and this is all part of Spawn's plan to get the two factions to fight each other so that they can do most of the dirty work for him, as we see both of the gangs arriving in the alleyway later that night to go head-to-head to decide who will control this part of New York City. On the next page, we see that the battle is intensifying off-page as we see this guy from the creeps running towards the fray. However, he is then blasted backwards and smacks against a dumpster, leaving a large blood splat, as then one of the members of the Nerds is thrown headfirst into a brick wall as his head seemingly explodes and then his body falls. And then all the commotion dies down as we see Spawn crawl up from out from inside of the dumpster to survey what's happened, as he believes that basically the battle has ended and his plan has worked. We then see a public service announcement from Ollie Optics featuring Armature telling you to draw better so that they can color better. This is a pretty common reoccurring little public service announcement that happens throughout Image for a lot of 1993 and possibly even further out than that. But it's not going to be the last time that we see Armature show up in one of these videos. We then see that the battle has in fact ended and that the only gang member left standing is none other than Byron, as he exclaims that the Nerds are dead and the creeps are dead, but Byron still lives and that he rules the alley and that he owns the alley. However, he is then interrupted when Spawn just politely and slowly speaks Byron's name in a low tone. And this is a pretty gory scene we can see in this 2-page splash, as there's just bodies and body parts and weapons and blood all over the alleyway. It's mass carnage, and it's been one heck of a battle that we didn't get to see any of because I think someone by the name of Todd McFarlane might have been taking a little bit of a break in terms of artwork for this issue. Spawn then motions to Byron and says, "Let's play Alien." Byron, of course, has no idea what Spawn is talking about, and before he can react, Spawn then decides to teleport. We find out in this issue that Spawn really hates teleporting, both for the reasons that A, it's a huge drain on his limited powers, and it's also incredibly painful whenever he does it. Byron is confused to have seen Spawn disappear in front of him, as he confronts Bobby and asks him what just happened and where Spawn went. Bobby tells him that he doesn't know, that Spawn's a very weird guy, and that he doesn't always understand what's happening. We then see that Byron makes a kind of herk noise and another kind of gurgling noise, as we see in Spawn's internal monologue. He remembers seeing an interview with Houdini, who at one time locked himself into a bank vault so that he could escape it. And Houdini's reasoning for the reporters at the time of how he was able to do this and get out of it was that bank vaults are designed to keep people from getting in, not from getting out, which is in reference to the impressive and near impervious armor that Byron's body is made of, as it's supposed to protect his soft inside bits, but only from attacks that are coming from outside, as we see that Spawn teleported inside of Byron's body and has now punched his way directly through Byron's sternum and then rips his way out of Byron, killing Byron in the process. We then see on the final page of the story Spawn carelessly throwing Byron's head into a heap of trash, and Bobby talking to Spawn, saying that he's not going to ask about what all happened in front of him, and he doesn't want Spawn to explain any of the teleportation or, how he's able to survive injuries that should kill him, but he does want to know what they're supposed to do now that a, almost literal war just happened in this alleyway and that the police are surely on his way. Spawn says that they're just gonna get out of the alleyway for a couple of weeks, let the police clean up the mess, and then move back in. As we see that the next issue is who killed Spawn. Then we go to the spawning grounds. Nothing really special about this month's spawning grounds. Most of the issues or most of the letters, I should say, are overwhelmingly positive. Not a lot of negative letters printed in this month's issue. However, there are a lot of people who are talking about the events of Spawn number 9 and the appearances of Angela and Cagliostro, trying to figure out exactly how they play into the story, giving their own little theories, praising the writing that Neil Gaiman did in that issue, and also asking Todd if he and Gaiman will be teaming up in the future to do some more projects. Todd says that they do hopefully plan on putting together an Angela miniseries, which, spoiler alert, they did put together an Angela miniseries. And it all seems very positive in this letter section. However, we're now 30 years into the future and we know the falling out between Todd and Neil that happened and the way that working relationship ended on bad terms. So it is kind of, a little bit somber to go back and read what, could have been the beginning of a really great team up between two very talented creators. And, the fact that it just ended poorly does kind of stink. We then see the second page of the spawning grounds. Nothing really special here. Like I said, it's all mostly praiseful letters that were written in. And then we see image fan art featuring fan art of the Max. We see Spawn right here. We see another Spawn. We see Spawn and Grifter. This continues on to the next page. We then see a picture of the others who, I don't believe that book lasted long. I don't think I have any issues with the others, but I want to track some down just to see what this was all about, because from the advertisements of it I've seen, it doesn't look like it was very good. We then see Chapel, Wildstar. If you'd like to know more about Wildstar, check out my video on Wildstar number 1. And if you'd like to know more about Chapel, check out my video playlist on Youngblood. We then see a crucifixion image of Spawn. Kind of surprised that someone would have drawn that back in 1993. It's a little bit edgy, I guess, but, that fits in with the rest of the 90s. We then see Zealot and Savage Dragon. And on the reverse inside cover, we get the one and only advertisement in this issue of Spawn for showcase sealers, which are basically a plastic container that you can put your comic books in and then hang them on the wall as art. These do actually still exist to this day. If you Google showcase sealers, you can still buy these. And remarkably, they're still around the same price of $10.95. I think you get some kind of a deal if you buy them in bulk, but don't quote me on that. I'm not positive. They don't look exactly the same. They now have kind of like a black border frame that goes around them, or at least as of the recording of this video, they do. But I actually am thinking about buying some of these because this would be kind of cool to take some different issues of books that had some really cool covers and just kind of hang them up on the wall as, artwork. And that was Spawn number 11. I personally do not care for this issue. It's probably one of my least favorite Spawn issues that exist, and it's definitely my least favorite of the first 12 issues that were printed. There's nothing inherently wrong with the story itself, but this issue really does not fit in with the rest of the Spawn narrative up until this point. It seems really absurd that there were these two heavily armed cyborg street gangs in New York City, and Spawn had no idea that they were there at all, and that they've never shown up until this point. I don't know if this was a result of Frank Miller just coming in and wanting to write a one-off self-contained story, or if it was, Todd saying that this is where he wanted the issue to go to. It's not really explained, but like I said, the events of this single issue don't really have much of a bearing on the story going forward. It just feels like a very haphazardly thrown together Freak of the Week type of issue. And I also feel like Todd's artwork was a little bit, I don't know if subpar is the right way to say it, but it didn't feel as detailed or as precise as it did in the previous 10 issues. It feels a little bit looser, a little, I don't know if sloppier is the right word, but it just didn't seem to have the same kind of crisp and, perfectionist type of feel as we've been seeing in the 10 issues that were leading up to this. But those are just my opinions. This might be your most favorite issue of Spawn that was ever printed. And if it is, that's cool. Everyone's entitled to their own opinions. If you enjoyed today's video, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.